Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Credential Engine Board Chair, Eleni Papadakis.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. We're so thankful that you've come to join us for this big event. There have been so many people involved in getting Credential Engine off the ground, and especially building the credential registry. And this is our event to launch it. And I want to start with congratulations to everybody who has been involved in this. Let's give everybody a big round of applause. And for those who don't know me, I know so many people in the room. For those who don't know me, I'm Eleni Papadakis. I'm the chair of this board of Credential Engine. I'm really honored to be playing that role. My day job is executive director of Washington State's Workforce Board. And so, you know, everybody that's been involved in this, they came to this realization about the need for credential transparency and a single point to get this information and a common language. They came to it organically, whether they were coming from the business sector, from the labor sector, from education, higher ed, K-12, workforce development. They came to it organically. There's a realization that we needed something, because the dialogue between students, job seekers, public sector, and employers was changing. And it seemed nuanced to a lot of folks, but it was game-changing. And that change moved the proxy, if you will, for knowledge, skills, and abilities of individuals from degrees to a need for something that was clearer, a standardized, clear articulation of the knowledge, skills, and abilities, the competencies of the folks that employers were trying to hire. They were looking for something that would give them confidence, and the recession did a huge number on this. It was happening gradually, but in the recession, as those of us in workforce development and economic development started talking to employers, we learned that they saw hiring as one of the biggest risks that they were taking in moving their companies forward. And our job is to try and mitigate that risk. And that's the realization that everybody came to in this, and we have some incredible partners that have been working on this. Sorry. I lost my place. Okay. So this realization, as I say, it's been happening everywhere. We are fortunate to have a few governors who have been paying a lot of attention to this issue. And I want to take a moment to read a portion of a letter from two governor leaders, one my own, Governor Jay Inslee from the state of Washington, and Governor Dennis Dugard from the state of South Dakota. They are the chair and co-chair of NGA's Education and Workforce Committee. Governor Dugard is also the chair of the Western Governors Association. Governor Inslee is very much involved with him as well. And so they're leading this dialogue with governors across the country that are seeing this. And I'm just going to read a portion of the letter that they wrote. There are a lot of congratulations to the folks involved. But they also say, across a wide range of industries, employers in our states are trying to adapt to new workplace realities, encountering overwhelming skills gaps, and facing major challenges navigating the new world of talent development. At the same time, workers at all levels, students, job seekers, career changes, are making life-altering decisions about how to invest in their education and training, with little guidance about the potential impact of those investments. This is why we're here. And you know, this navigation, we've been trying forever to help young people especially navigate the world of education, higher education, career. there's so many credentials in the marketplace, and there are way more than ever before. There's a proliferation of all kinds of new credentials, like badges and micromasters, and who knows what the next one is going to be, right? And consider this. So Credential Engine did a survey, first of its kind survey. They identified 300,000 credentials currently on the marketplace, and those are traditional credentials. Those are 2- and 4-year degrees, graduate degrees, apprenticeships, licenses, that sort of thing. It doesn't even include the badges and high school diplomas and all of that. So we've got to get there, and that's what this group is going to be talking to you about. We are going to have a chance to hear from some of the leaders that are partnering with us. But before we do, I want to say a few special thank yous. As I say, there have been 100+ people that have been involved in this. We couldn't have gotten started without some very key folks. First and foremost, the folks who put up not just the funding, but the original thought and vision around what this could be. And I want to say a special thank you to the Lumina Foundation, really the first in funders and visionaries for this, JP Morgan Chase and Company, and Microsoft. We couldn't be here without them. Their vision and leadership is irreplaceable. Business Roundtable is hosting us today. They took the reins on this and said, we've got to create an organization to drive us over the finish line. And they've been phenomenal in this. And Dane Lynn is here. I know, where's Dane, who's done so much of the legwork on this. Of course, I have to say a special thank you to our very small but very mighty staff of 3, led by CEO Scott Cheney in the back there. Wave. And yes. And his talented group of 2, Emily and Carrie. And then he does have, they have contractors in other parts of the country and even other parts of the world, pretty exciting. And of course, I have to say thank you to my fellow board members, all of whom have incredibly busy jobs and yet heart and soul are committed to the promise of what Credential Engine can be. And so I'm going to turn this over now so you can hear from some of our thought leaders and partners. I want you to help me please welcome Josh Mitchell from the Wall Street Journal, who's going to facilitate the panel. Josh, come on up.
Hi, is it working? Can you hear me? Great. Just one reason I'm here is I write a lot about student debt, and I'm constantly talking with students who get into a lot of debt to go to higher education, to go to school, and a lot of them feel like they overpaid, and they say they didn't have enough transparency when they went to school to know what they were getting themselves into, whether they were going into the right field, the right school. So I think this type of tool could sort of help that issue. So anyways, could we go down the line and just say who you are and a brief statement of why you're here, and then we can talk?
You want me to start?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. I'm Wes Bush. I'm Chairman and CEO of Northrop Grumman. I also chair the Education and Workforce Committee for the Business Roundtable. And as was mentioned earlier, BRT is all in for Credential Engine. We see this as a very exciting tool, a great way to create this connection that we know we've been missing. And I'm really excited to be here today and to be a part of this conversation.
Hi there, I'm Liz Schuler. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer, the Chief Financial Officer of the National AFL-CIO, which is an umbrella organization of 56 different national unions and international unions, all the way from professional football players to teachers and professionals to people who work in hotels and every sector of the economy, essentially. 12.5 million working men and women. And we care about Credential Engine in this effort because we know that workers are going to need to get more education and continue to learn and ladder up through their careers in the future. And we want it to be transparent and that we want it to be high quality. So Credential Engine is exactly what we need in order to make sure people are getting what they're paying for, as you said.
Hi everybody, my name is Ted Mitchell and I'm the president of the American Council on Education. And ACE represents and convenes the entire higher education ecosystem, 2-year, 4-year, public and private. And so we are all in on Credential Engine as well, and represent some hundreds of thousands of the currently existing credentials. One of the other things that ACE has done for, about 75 years is that it's helped veterans, folks in the military, and people who are involved in employer-based training, convert that training into course credit in higher education. And so we're very, very excited at the toolkit that Credential Engine is providing to all of us.
I'm Jamie Marasotis, president of Lumina Foundation. You heard about Lumina from Eleni a minute ago. Lumina is a national foundation focused on making post-high school learning, high-quality post-high school learning available to all. We are focused on improving high-quality attainment for all populations in this country. And this work, as we'll get into it in a moment, is really core to what we're about, making sure that people have high-quality credentials that represent real and relevant learning is critical to what we're trying to achieve as a catalyzing organization for the country.
Yeah, so I was going to start with you, and sort of go more into how your group got involved and what exactly was the problem that you identified that this is trying to address.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Josh, because at a sort of macro level, I think we all know that we are living in a different world than we were before. We're in a knowledge economy, and in a knowledge economy, there's this rising demand for talent. And, we saw that most clearly in the sort of exclamation point following the recession when over a 5-year period, 11.6 million new jobs were created, and 11.5 million of those new jobs went to people with a post-secondary credential. So we know that this is not an abstract conversation, it's a real conversation, that demand for talent is growing very rapidly. The problem that we identified very quickly, and that we've been trying to focus on at Lumina for the last few years, is that this is not a marketplace where there's a monopoly, though we've tended to focus a lot on colleges and universities in our history as a country in terms of what we're trying to produce in order to get to that point where greater prosperity is possible through high-quality learning. We recognize that there are lots of ways in which you can get a credential which signifies that high-quality learning through lots of different places: an apprentice program, a workplace-based training effort, something that you do online in your own direct-to-learning context, as well as a college degree or other type of credential. And the challenge is that there's really no transparency or comparability among all of that universe of different credentials. This is a challenge. It's a challenge for consumers. It's a challenge for employers. It's really a challenge for all of us who are trying to make sure that more Americans have these high-quality credentials, because those credentials are really the currency of the labor market. Absent your ability to demonstrate what Eleni was talking about, that you have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to demonstrate that you can be successful both in work and in life, we're going to be increasingly shooting in the dark when it comes to trying to understand what this credentialing marketplace is all about. So Credential Engine is an effort to create a common language, to create a common understanding of what's behind those credentials. And the nuts and bolts of it are complex and interesting and nuanced, but at the top level, from our vantage point, we're trying to dramatically increase high-quality attainment as a catalyzing organization at Lumina, and we think Credential Engine is essential to that work.
So Wes, I was going to turn to you next, and one of the questions I constantly ask employers in my job is, what do they want? What skills do they need? Hard skills, soft skills, what are they looking for in workers, and how could a tool like this sort of help you find the right employee?
Yeah. Well, let me give you a little context for that, because from the optic of the Business Roundtable, I can give you a little flavor, not just from the perspective of my company or my industry, but more broadly. Last year, we launched a survey of the Business Roundtable companies to test ourselves on this, because we found ourselves in so many meetings, all of us talking about this workforce issue that we're all seeing. So the test was a rather comprehensive survey that was put together by a number of the chief HR officers from some of the BRT companies that we sent out to the membership to ask these types of questions about workforce. And I'll just give you a few headlines of the findings, but then go more to the point of the realization that we came to. The headline of the finding was 95% of the companies that participated in this survey, and we had great turnout in the participation, 95% said they were having some degree to a great degree of difficulty in finding the workforce that they need to actually execute the operations of their company. And if you peel that back, that means, can we grow? That means, can we actually deliver as enterprises? So we all know that companies across a variety of different industries face different challenges, but this is a common challenge that we all face. And it is becoming an increasing challenge, particularly as our economy continues to shape in the direction of becoming a more innovation-driven economy. And as we are seeing these large number of job openings that aren't being filled. Today, approximately 6 million job openings across the United States, not filled. So it caused us to stand back and ask some questions of ourselves about what should business really be doing. We found that companies are doing a lot of good things. In fact, we compiled that information. It's out there on the BRT website, brt.org, called Work in Progress. I'd commend it as good reading for anyone interested to see what companies are doing. But even though we feel good about a lot of the things we're doing, it was pretty clear we're not doing a great job of sending the right demand signal to help clarify what it is that we're really looking for employees, both today and as we move forward into the future. And clarifying the demand signal is critically important. It's important, obviously, for those who are thinking about how to align their educational objectives to employability in this fast-paced economy that we have. It's also critically important for higher education to be able to ensure that its curriculum and the way that it is creating the workforce and higher education at all levels, anything post-secondary. And so I think it's, for the business community, this has been an interesting period of time because to some extent the light bulb has really gone on, that we have a big responsibility to step up, to be a part of this process, to help increase transparency so that all the parts of this ecosystem involved in creating the workforce, both for today and for the future, have better information. And that set of credentials and competencies is a part of what we're working to communicate through this new tool. And I would say more broadly, just in terms of the efforts that business is undertaking with higher education at all levels.
Liz, how could this help the members of your group?
Yeah, and it's great to be up here on stage with this group because I think in this polarized environment, it's rare when you can find a CEO sitting next to a labor person and have, the universities and foundations and everyone together on something. And I think that speaks to the importance of the issue and what a moment we're in. And when I hear you speak about what the needs of companies are, I think we want to provide that, right? We want, the labor movement wants to be a partner in making sure that, you have the best, highly skilled, highly trained workforce on the planet. And so we think that that's part of our mission. Certainly in the unionized environment, we've been training for over 100 years. And I think people always think of apprenticeship when they think of the labor movement. And certainly we've had a long track record of training people in the construction industry and in the entertainment industry. But we're now looking at ways to reinvent apprenticeship for all sectors, really, of the economy because that model is so successful. And it really is an earn while you learn kind of concept so that people aren't sinking a ton of money into perhaps an education that they're not sure they're going to get a job in at the end of the pathway. And we in the labor movement invest about over $1 billion a year in partnership with our employers. I think the building trades say they're like the third largest university system in the country if you add up all of the training centers that they have across the country. So we have experience in this sphere. And I think the trick is how outside the union movement can we make sure that working people broadly are getting access to the right kinds of training and the right kinds of opportunities because the future of work is changing. And over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, sometimes we don't even know what jobs there are going to be in the future. But we do know, as I said earlier, that people are going to have to be in a constant state of learning and advancing their skills. And so we are looking to the Credential Engine as a critical component to making sure that there's a transparency in what folks are getting when they sign up for a particular badge or credential or certificate. And we want to see the apprenticeship actually be a partner in the Credential Engine. And so I'm personally working on that and working with our colleagues in the labor movement to do that. But as an example, I would just say, a nurse, I think, is a great example because of the healthcare industry being such a changing environment. How does a nurse, a young person who wants to pursue that career, distinguish between the value of an entry-level nursing credential that's received, say, from a community college versus one that's obtained from a private career institute, for example? Is that credential going to translate state to state? Is that the type of credential, one or the other, going to be recognized by a particular hospital in their market? Is that going to lead to a good job after the program? And so I think those are the kinds of questions that we're asking as we advocate for working people who are looking to better themselves in this changing marketplace, and the labor movement wants to be a partner in that.
So, Ted, I saved you for last because I am very eager to talk to him about schools. So in the past, schools have sort of fought transparency efforts, or at least when you were with the Obama administration and the college scorecard, there was some pushback. How do schools feel about a tool like this? Are they on board with it? Because I would imagine some schools, might end up having to close if it's discovered that there's no worth in going there.
And that would probably be a good thing. And I think that that's what we all acknowledge is not so much the goal of transparency, but it is what transparency is about. Let's create a platform in which people put their stuff up, where their claims about what that stuff can do are judged in the relevant marketplace, and those results are made visible to the public. That's what the college scorecard does. That's what Credential Engine will do at a much more granular level. I'm really encouraged, Josh, to get to the first part of your question. I'm really encouraged by the eagerness of some in the university, the traditional university sector, to participate in this. Elon College is one of the pioneers in Credential Engine. Put everything that they do into Credential Engine. The University of Wisconsin Extension Program, it's all in, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think that universities and colleges are being asked the flip side, Wes, of the question that the employers are asking. They're trying to figure out where can they go, what credentials can they get that will help them along their pathways. So I think that this becomes a critically important tool over time in the way the scorecard is for people to look at. The nurse example is a great one. To look at the potential value of different programs. I think in talking about the scorecard, I think both are transparency plays of national and international importance. I think the other thing the Credential Engine has done that I want to call out is making all of this information available, open API from beginning to end. And what that's going to allow is it's going to allow app developers to use this information to get it out to more people so that it is more vital in the decision-making process along the way.
Jamie, one of the big questions these days is, should people go more toward trade schools than they have in the past? Do you have any thoughts on that question? And is there a risk that this tool will simply overemphasize how much people earn and therefore sort of devalue the traditional four-year degree and steer people toward trades?
Yeah, no, I think it's unlikely. In fact, I think quite the contrary. Part of the issue for consumers is that there's a real cacophony, and so part of the problem for the consumers, we've been talking a lot about transparency, there's the critical issue of comparability that's behind the CTDL and what the Credential Transparency Descriptive Language is all about. It creates this protocol, this common language, this way of commonly describing what's there. And that's going to be just as important for the person who's going to the trade school as the person going to the college or university. And I think equally important is that given what Liz was talking about in terms of the changing nature of work, what we're facing is the prospect of a lifelong of change, a lifelong of opportunity for learning that you learn and you apply it, you learn and you apply it, you learn and you apply it. In order to be able to do that, you've got to have that comparability in the system. And the real problem for consumers right now is that they can start out and say, oh, I got my certification in X, and now I want to go and get my degree, but the degree granting entity has no way of knowing how to value or measure what that certification represents in terms of where they are in their learning objectives. So by creating this comparability, I think it creates a greater set of opportunities for people to move up the ladder of opportunity, to create more opportunities for themselves. And to go back to the sort of point about the college scorecard, an important difference between Credential Engine and a college scorecard is that Credential Engine is a market mechanism, right? So it's an open source platform that will allow everyone who issues credentials to publish their data using the protocol, using the registry format, and then to allow all of the organizations and entities to develop the apps, the tools, et cetera, that'll be able to capture and use that information to help drive improvements in consumer behavior. And I like that a lot. I always prefer a market mechanism to a government mechanism. And in this case, I think this could be a very powerful tool for the market to use to actually create greater opportunity, greater success for both the workers and the employers.
Yeah, please jump in. Yeah.
I was just thinking as you were talking, we have some partnerships with various community colleges in pockets of the country for tradespeople, for example, who want to get credit for their skills and experience and apply it to a degree, whether it's an associate's degree or even perhaps a bachelor's in a management kind of setting. So I was just thinking that the Credential Engine could actually be helpful in someone like an electrician who has a bevy of experience, has gone through an apprenticeship program, has on-the-job and classroom training, has on-the-job experience that can actually help him become a contractor, start his or her own business, wants to get an MBA, perhaps. How does that fit into the Credential Engine? I suppose it will at a certain point. But I could see a real-world application just with that example.
But Liz, I think that's an important reflection of what we're all seeing in the workforce that we're looking for the future. You know, we've always talked about being a lifelong learner, but everything is moving at such a pace today that lifelong learning is measured in much shorter increments. And the ability to have an understanding through a tool like the Credential Engine of how you can actually stack credentials over time, I think is really going to make a big difference for individuals, because it's hard to tell exactly what are the requirements that today companies need an individual to have for many of these positions where the requirements in the position are changing over time. And this is a way for companies to have a lot more transparent communication in the marketplace to help individuals line up, which will help the companies on those capabilities. So, you know, the earlier question about will it focus folks more on trade schools? Well, if that's where the marketplace needs some support initially, that's a good outcome, particularly if it enables individuals to gain a credential that they can get started on, and if economically it makes more sense to start there and then stack credentials on top of it over time to progress into the opportunities that they see emerging in the marketplace that has a lot more transparency.
Wes,
I think it makes sense.
Earlier you talked about sending the demand
Yes.
signal. And I think as we talk with employers and chief learning officers around the country, it's not just the sort of the trades or the technical skills. You need to improve your writing. You need to improve your communication skills in order to move to that next level. Jamie, to your point, today, what do I do when I'm told that by my supervisor? I look at the online catalog of my local community college? Maybe. I look at the ad on the Metro for an outfit that's selling those courses. What Credential Engine does is it enables that demand signal to get translated into action in a pretty efficient way, so that there is sorting that an individual can do and really move forward. So I think that the trade school thing is a little bit of a red herring. I think that it's about continuing education just in time at the right moment with the right stuff. It's adaptive, it's flexible, and Credential Engine is just a very, very powerful tool to be able to get there.
So, Wes, what's the big missing ingredient when workers apply at a firm like yours? Is it they lack the hard skills, how to code, or is it more of the soft skills? What is the underlying problem?
Fundamentally, the underlying problem is finding the matches. And oftentimes, it's clear if you just look at a kind of a census-based representation of the capabilities in the marketplace, you can say, oh, well, there should be enough of that capability out there. But actually aligning the needs of the company to the capabilities in the marketplace is really hard. And that's why companies have built these very large talent acquisition organizations. We have one in our company. We brought in over 7,000 people last year. But if you just look at the yield metrics, the number of people that you have to talk to get through a first hurdle of, all right, maybe that's close, let's go to the next hurdle. The pipeline you have to create to get one person is huge, because there is not this clarity in the marketplace around what companies are saying or talking about when they're describing their requirements and how that matches into the credentials that individuals have or have gained or want to gain. Companies, to some extent, out of frustration, have created a lot of that work internally, that training activity internally. And there will always be some things that companies need to do internally, just unique to their particular industry or what they're looking for in individuals. But what we've experienced over time is, and again, largely driven by the pace of the technology, that's great, we'll build something inside, but we know we could be much more effective by having an institution that's dedicated to education and really knows what they're doing in terms of educating, do that and take that on. And as we have come to that realization over time, we've developed a number of partnerships with universities and community colleges where we're trying to take the curriculum, the learnings that we've developed internally, and partner with those educational institutions so that they're the grantor of the credential. And I actually think that this is a powerful way of enhancing this connectivity between business and education. And it's not that we're trying to transition specific training programs in, right? It becomes a component of a broader curriculum that enables individuals to land in the workforce ready to work, but also with that broader education that's going to help them continue to learn and to have the ability to grow and to continue to build with these credentials over time. So if you ask about specific skills, right, that today we see gaps in, and again, I'll go back to the survey that we did because I was just absolutely amazed by the consistency in the messages across so many different industries, whether or not we were talking about aerospace and defense or financial services or energy or transportation or pharma. A lot of the things that you might imagine were there. We all cannot get enough STEM graduates. That's a fundamental issue in our economy today. We expected that conclusion, and we got it, and no surprise. But layering on top of that, many of the other aspects of what it takes to work in today's work environment, whether it's the ability to communicate effectively using today's technology platforms, the ability to integrate across complex issues that businesses are facing. And by the way, this is at all levels. If you think about someone who's coming out of a trade school today, they've got to know how to code. If they can't code, they're going to have difficulty actually interacting with many of the trade disciplines that are in the marketplace today. And so when you say that sounds like maybe I'm sitting down at the terminal by myself. It's not actually. You're working with a team of people to figure out how to make this set of machinery actually do what it needs to do. And so we've really raised the skill levels across the board in our economy that are necessary to enable companies and enterprises to do what it is we're out doing. And that requires this level of understanding and engagement that we're missing oftentimes in folks that are coming right out of school, that companies identified as a part of this survey as one of those missing ingredients. So yes, it is. There's parts to it that are specific to the technologies, but it's also how in a work environment do people actually engage with the things they know how to do to create the outcomes? Because that's what business is about, creating those outcomes.
Ted, from a practical perspective, So how would schools use this? Would they drop a program if the earnings weren't high enough? How exactly, do you have a sense of how schools would use this?
So I think from a traditional, let me talk about sort of traditional education providers. I think that Eleni started out by talking about moving away from proxies to competencies. And I think that Wes, what you just described, and Liz, what you were talking about, is exactly in line with that. And so I think the first thing that universities and colleges, community colleges, will do is they will begin to decode what their large packaged degrees are. And they'll either within degrees or across degrees create a certification for a set of competencies that could be about complex problem solving, for example. And I think that will be very useful, not only for a public-facing point of view, but internal to the institution. As institutions get much better at communicating with students what they should be learning in a course, a program, or a degree. So I think that's the lowest hanging fruit. I think for programs that are identified as having inferior outcomes, institutions will respond the way institutions respond. They'll either try to fix them, they'll jettison them, or they may just stick with them until the demand for them dries up. And that's, Jamie, where you were talking about the importance of the market, whether it's an internal market to the institution or an external market. I think the other opportunity that we see, and we're at ACE, we're working with non-traditional providers of this training, whether those are companies, whether that's the military, or whether those are sort of new entrants into the marketplace. And I think for them, they are typically very nimble organizations, and so will try things out back and forth. And the Credential Engine will be a very good, not exactly A/B testing mechanism, but it will certainly allow them to get the market signals that they need in the short run to be able to modify their programs, drop the ones that are less successful.
There's an interesting question here, though, in the question that you raised, Josh, which is, will this ultimately be an accountability mechanism for the credential providers? And I think that's an open question right now, but it might be an accountability mechanism in ways that we're not thinking of. So in your example, you're saying, would a school, a college or university, look at their own credentials and say, we're not meeting, we're not up to snuff, we're not meeting the market demand, therefore we're going to get rid of it. But if you think about the way this could work, right, it's a consumer-oriented, demand-driven system. Consumers might say, look, my competency, right? Competency is, fancy language for basically you got to show what you know, right? So if you can show what you know from all the different places that you've learned, and employers start to recognize that, the market's going to say, you know what, School X isn't very good at that. We can see that. And so it may be that the market ultimately solves that problem, not necessarily that the college or university or the workforce-based program or the union or whatever is going to sort of make a decision and say, oh my goodness, we're not up to snuff. I think that ultimately, if the market provides that kind of pressure, I think the system really will prove its worth, because then the market is going to create the pressure that if you're School X, you better change that program, or you're going to have real problem in recruiting students and drawing resources and all the rest.
Yeah, and this is where we get to the question of costs, and we were talking about this in the green room, which is, maybe it doesn't cause programs to close so much as it causes the price of those programs to come down, right, if the students are getting a return on their investment. That's sort of my idealistic vision of how higher education would work. It would function as a market. Is that a realistic vision? I mean, because there is already a little bit of transparency where students can go on the college scorecard and see what the default rates are on student loans, and they can see what the average earnings are for some programs. So I do wonder, is this really a game changer? Liz, do you have any thoughts on that? Will this really affect the decisions of students and workers?
Well, and I was going to say what you were mentioning about companies sort of being the arbiters and the market taking care of it. It's sort of happening informally now. Some of our employers, there are definitely institutions where they have someone come to them from that particular education institution and say, not so much, right? And others that they hold in high regard. So this will be a way of sort of formalizing that and sort of undergirding that in a more practical way. But I think that is the point, is what is this going to do for working people, the consumers who are out there looking for assistance and where they're going, how to navigate this big marketplace. And, you know, they do feel pretty helpless in some cases. They don't know who to trust. Who can they go to? Not as much in the labor movement, obviously, because we have pathways and mechanisms within our organizations to do that. But you know, in our country, I think there has been a shift away from investment in workforce development as a whole. And now I think we're almost at a pivot point where hopefully that's starting to change as we see the jobs of the future coming our way. It is a U.S. competitiveness question, right? Are we going to make those investments? And I think partnerships in more creative ways are how we get that done. And often in a sector, for example, you can come together, and I have one example in the manufacturing sector where you know, 60 different companies came together with the labor movement in the Midwest and said, what is it that we're missing? What do we need? Well, we need a pathway to give more skills to incumbent workers that are on the production line to help them move up within our companies. And so this partnership was formed, and we had so many great success stories, but I think of Brandy Dunham. She was the first registered apprentice in the what we call Industrial Manufacturing Technician Apprenticeship. It's a manufacturing production worker apprenticeship. She had a pretty rough childhood growing up. She went to college briefly, didn't graduate, sunk as much money as she could, needed to go to work because she was a single mom and start earning, and she went to work as a bank teller. She was a bank teller for 9 years, and then ultimately she had to change work paths again and found herself working as an assembly worker at a company called HPS. And she had never worked in manufacturing before, but it was a highly skilled, highly waged job. And she had such a great attitude that she was selected to go through this apprenticeship. Well, what does she do? She graduates with this apprenticeship. With her new skills, she becomes a quality control inspector with the company, making more money. But this, again, was done in a setting that labor and management coming together to find the solution, to find a way to fund it, invest in it, and help people actually get better jobs. And so I think that's where we need to be thinking in the end, is how are we making better lives for people when we talk about you know, a credential engine kind of here in our bubble of Washington, D.C. It's sort of like, how does this apply practically out there in our communities?
So I've promised that I would provide time for anyone out there to ask a question. So can we go to Q&A now? Yeah? Yeah, let's do Q&A. Okay, how about you?
Hi, Jen Worth, American Association of Community Colleges. I wanted to just publicly applaud the staff of Credential Engine. Thank you for all you guys are doing. As we look at scaling this across all the community colleges or other national networks that are in the room, can you guys point out a couple of stunning models of success where an organization is uploading all of their credentials because they feel confident enough to really showcase this?
It's like 140 different organizations, I think, in the registry now. Is that right?
Already in the registry, and Indiana, I think, is a
In fact,
stunning model.
There are 2 states now that are committing to publishing all of their credentials. So Eleni talked about the applause from 2 governors, but 2 states are actually committing to at scale publishing all of their credentials, Indiana and New Jersey. And so, you know, those 2 states, I think, represent the sort of tip of the iceberg of what's going to be possible here. I think the states are recognizing that they've got to be in this game, as are a growing number of the Business Roundtable members where Wes is providing leadership, as are a growing number of the unions that are members of AFL-CIO. So, you know, I think that there's lots of examples where individual providers are recognizing, as part of their bigger networks that they're a part of, that they need to be in this system. Ultimately, over time, there will be a tipping point, in my view, and the tipping point will be that if you're a provider and you're not in the system, you're going to lose market share, you're going to lose opportunity. And you know, there are lots of, it's like a who's who of workforce development in the audience today, but you know, Goodwill is a good example. Jim Gibbons, the CEO of Goodwill Industries, is here, and Goodwill's one of those sort of national organizations that's doing this stuff at scale as one example of a sort of national leadership organization that gets it and that's on board and is driving very quickly towards making sure that this is happening in all the communities that Goodwill's present.
I'll just add to that, though, it's clear that we've got to have the educational institutions stepping up and loading in the credentials. It's also clear business has to step up. And I'm proud, already we have about 50 of the Business Roundtable companies committed to this. That number seems to keep going up every day. And the more that business can see this actually happening and see the benefit to business, I think that's going to continue to accelerate as well. So it has to happen on all sides of this equation for this to work.
And I think there are regional approaches that make sense too. The Business Higher Education Forum is a great example of a group that has brought together educators and businesses, done skills analysis of regional areas, and then begun to build this. And Credential Engine can be a bespoke opportunity there. The apprenticeship programs that I know you guys are working on are, I think, just an obvious target to begin the work. I think I'm going to twist Josh's last question around. I think that this is a great democratizer. And it is as much about identifying success as it is about helping struggling programs improve. And there are successful credential providers across the country who are unknown. And Credential Engine is one of the vehicles that can help build demand for those programs and help increase the supply of folks to a variety of industries.
I should also point out that one of the first questions I had for the organizers was, where does the data come from? And my understanding is a lot of it comes from the states themselves, because I know there's been a lot of problems with schools, mostly in the for-profit sector, but also some of the nonprofit sector, not providing good information on the returns for certain degrees. So it does seem like a lot of the data will come from the states themselves, and that's probably more reliable in a lot of cases than the schools.
And as more data comes in, I think it's sort of, it gets better and better, and you don't want to be left out, right? I mean, you see the names that are involved in this organization, and similar to your commitment, Wes, the labor movement is also committing in terms of its apprenticeship programs. But I think no one wants to be the first, right? You kind of dip your toe in the water and see how it goes. But now that we're reaching more critical mass, I think you'll see the participation kind of skyrocket from here.
And we chair the higher education group, and we're working to find exemplars and models and trying to get more and more of the institutions we work with involved.
Great. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
That's right. Hi, my name is Mary Alice McCarthy, and I direct the Center on Education and Skills at New America. And so first of all, yes, a big congratulations to the Credential Engine team. This is just a really exciting day. And I know what excites me about the Credential Engine is how much this information can help sort of reconnect or better connect education to economic mobility. And as education, of course, becomes more and more important, that connection to economic mobility strangely seems to be becoming more and more tenuous. So since I come from a policy shop, I'm gonna call out the elephant in the room, which is that we haven't talked very much about government and policy. And we've heard a little bit about states and what their role is. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what your vision is for what role you would like to see government at the federal level, at the state level, play in relation to Credential Engine. What would be your vision for a good connection to public policy? Is it just putting the information out there, or do you have a sense of how you would like to see policymakers use this information?
That's a good question. Yeah.
I'll speak as one person and say right now, very little, Mary Alice. It'd be great if they stayed out of the way for a while. It'd be really terrific. I do think that this is a market-driven mechanism, and to the extent that government tries to steer it, that could be problematic in these early stages. And I'm going to come back to your question in a moment, but it's worth underscoring here that this all happened in very rapid time frame. And I was, the sort of brains behind this are Jeannie Kitchens and Bob Sheets and their teams. And I was talking with Jeannie before we started here, and I had this view here that we've been talking about this for like 4 or 5 years, and Jeannie said, you know, we really had the first conversation less than 3 years ago. It's only been a year that we've been in the beta stage of this. This has happened very, very quickly for good reason, because the market is demanding it. There is this very rapid demand. So, but you know, when we first had the conversation, I walked away from the first conversation with them when they sort of introduced this concept of credential transparency descriptive language. And I thought to myself, I have no idea what they're talking about. Absolutely no. And now I've become like a chief advocate for this idea. So it's all happened in very real time. And I'm worried about government engagement so early in the thinking here, because I'm not sure that government really understands what this is about yet. Now, I'm happy to see states stepping up to the equation, because states can actually facilitate the investment, if you will, in Credential Engine. In other words, the engagement of the credential providers, whether they're workforce programs or college and universities or what have you. But I want to sort of wait a little bit on deeper engagement about how they could use it for policy purposes until we get to that tipping point where we have enough information and we start to see these apps being developed that are coming out of the system, that are sort of capturing the data that's being produced through the CTDL. And then maybe we can have a different conversation. But I don't want to lead with what's government's role. I want government's role to follow what the market's doing here.
Ted, my question that I thought of when she asked that is, you know, right now students can borrow the same amount for an engineering degree versus art history or what have you that might have disparate earnings. Why shouldn't the government use a credential engine to set the policies so that, you know, maybe you can borrow a lower amount for a lower earning, you know, yeah.
So I think that there's as we've talked about, Josh and I have had a variant of this conversation for the last 4 years. As we've talked about, I mean, there are so many intervening variables. The choice pattern that individuals go through when they're, especially in a 2-year or 4-year program, are different than when they're skilling up around a shorter term credential. And until we get to the point where we're able to decode the competencies in a degree, I think that we're dealing with proxies that may be bad judges of what is actually valuable in the market. We may get there, but I don't think that we're there yet. I will say, as the recovering policymaker on the panel, I'm in rigorous agreement with Jamie on this. I think that this is a tool that is based on broadly available, transparent data, and we should make that work. And then we can start to talk about whether it is a sophisticated enough tool to enter the public policy arena, whether it's around accountability, some kind of quality assurance that isn't necessarily hard-edged accountability. But I think that that's a discussion for a later day.
This question is from an online viewer who would like to get an idea of what incentive a competitive company would have to reveal their needs, you know, for credentials and competencies, and maybe give away trade secrets in doing so.
So I'll jump in on that one. It's not hard at all to figure out what companies need. I mean, as I said before, companies have spun up these huge talent acquisition machines. They're out there in the marketplace, and you'd kind of have to not be paying attention to know what they need. And I think we're all sort of getting over that it's somehow a big secret what it is we need in terms of workforce. And one of the indicators that I've seen of that, I would say, broader, smarter view of approaching this is actually in the work of the Business Higher Education Forum that was mentioned earlier. And I'll just give an example of that. A number of years ago, it was almost impossible to find anybody with the right type of training coming out of a university to help in the field of cybersecurity. And we were all doing our own little thing. You know, we were taking the best mathematicians and computer scientists we could find and trying to train them within our organizations. And, you know, that was interesting. It was fun. We were having some small, modest progress in doing it. But in the conversations at the Business Higher Education Forum, it became pretty clear if we just got our act together, worked with higher education, and didn't worry about the fact that it would become clear how much we all needed that talent. We already knew that because we were trying to hire from each other. We were competing for the same students coming out of school. That we could make some progress. And the Higher Education Workforce Initiative that was put together through the Business Higher Education Forum actually used these curriculum coming out of several of our companies and built programs that we intentionally did not brand as Northrop Grumman's program or some other company's program. It was all about raising the tide, creating this momentum in education to start generating more of that talent base. And while we're nowhere near to being done in terms of getting enough of that talent, it is so much better today, in large part because we've been able to create these partnerships not only with companies, but with the universities and the community colleges. And those partnerships are golden. And I think you mentioned that earlier, Liz, that partnership is the key. If we're able to come together on these things, get over this, I might disclose something I don't want somebody else to know, by the way, they already know it, just jump in and do it. And that's what we need to be seeing more of across our economy right now.
And the same goes for the labor movement. Really, if you think about apprenticeship between the union and the non-union, if we load up all of our apprenticeship secrets, that maybe our competitors might be able to see that and steal it from us. Well, more power to them, because we want them to actually be training up people to a higher level, because it's a competitiveness issue for unionized firms, right? They're investing so much in their training that the non-union competitor, if they were to do the same, it'd be more of a level playing field. So I think the whole notion is like lifting up all boats, right? Yeah.
It is.
Well, I've been told we're out of time. Thank you so much for each of your perspectives. I really enjoyed this talk.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Josh.
Josh.
Yep, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much to our panel, to Josh and Wes and Liz and Jamie. Let's give another round of applause to this panel. They were wonderful. And thankfully, they covered so much of what I was going to say that I get to get quickly to some of the details. But I hope what you heard in there was the potential and the vibrancy of what this can be. And I think it's why we're all there. I do have to say, being in a policy-making role and helping to inform policy in the state, that there is a role that we can be playing, which is what we should always be doing, is helping to inform consumer choice and making sure that the right information gets to our people and our companies in the ways that they can use it for their vibrancy and vitality and economic success. That's why I'm in this role now, and why I've signed on to Credential Engine. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about, somebody asked the question about who's signed on already. I want to tell you where we are now and where we're headed, and hopefully open up this invitation to get more of you to join us. So we have about 1,500 credentials in the registry now. We've had about 175 organizations that have started putting their credentials in. I think it was Jamie who mentioned Indiana and New Jersey have already signed on. We're trying to up the game now, up the ante, and get big buckets of credentials in through strategic partnerships. So the states, 2 states have signed on. My own state of Washington is in the midst of figuring this out. We're working with Microsoft. We're going to focus a lot on the IT sector and the credentials there, and we're also opening it up to other sectors that are important to Washington's economy. Indiana and New Jersey are dealing with big ticket sectors: healthcare, manufacturing, hospitality, transportation, logistics. So the biggies, right? We're going to get a lot of great information that way. We also have some other strategic partnerships that we're building. This one near and dear to my heart. So, I started out in community mental health and community-based organizations doing anti-poverty work before I got into economic development. And it was always, it made me heartsick to see how many veterans and transitioning military were coming through our programs. And when I'd find out the skills, the competencies that these folks had, how much training and experience they had through their military experience, and yet we couldn't make the crosswalk to the civilian labor market, right? We've partnered with a number of commands within the Department of Defense. We're going to start out with the healthcare credentials that are coming through military experience, and we'll be moving into many other of the occupational fields. This is going to be a game changer for us. I'm really excited about that. Then going forward, we're going to work at the national level, looking at some of these sectors, employer organizations, unions, other organizations that are doing national level credentialing, get them into the mix as well. And then I know a number of folks talked about the apps that we're going to be developing. So it's not just about getting the information in, it's how we get it out to all the different subsets of consumers that can really use this to make a difference in their lives, whether it's the employer lives or the job seeker and student lives. And I spend a lot of time on the student side because for the families and the students and the job seekers and dislocated workers, every dollar that they invest in education and training in the next step is precious to them. They work really hard to find those resources, and we want that return on investment to be there loudly and clearly for them to see. And for the employer side, we don't want them to waste any time with hiring. We want them to feel the predictability, the confidence to bring people on right away, because having talent, the right talent when they need it, is what drives their business prowess, right? So we're doing that. These apps are going to help us. So we're also bringing app developers on. When we have a few partners that have come on to help us test this. And on Monday, December 11th, we're going to have the first showcase. A number of these app partners are going to showcase what they've developed so you can see how information from the registry can be used. And we're hoping to entice developers of all kinds to come and join us on this. If you're interested, if you go to the credentialengine.org website, you can sign up for this as well. But today is about building up the registry. And so this is the open invitation for any provider of credentials of any type to sign on. Again, credentialengine.org, get on there. You'll see the tabs. We also have some supports behind it. If you run into trouble, there are folks who can help you answer the questions to help you navigate how to get in there, get your stuff in there. I do want to, so I mentioned, 175 organizations putting their credentials in. We have well over 100 partners, business, labor, higher ed, K-12, every sector you can imagine, and you heard from some folks today. We've had a network of advisors, technical experts in various aspects of this that have come together to help us over the past couple of years. So too many to name, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention a core few who had this vision, rolled up their shirt sleeves, and I want to introduce Bob Sheets. And I'm going to ask you guys to stand. Bob Sheets, Bob Jones, Steve Crawford, Roy Swift, Jeannie Kitchens, and Holly Zanville. And congratulations to all of you. And this wasn't just that they had that vision and knowledge. These are roll up your shirt sleeves, get it done kinds of folks, and we are so honored to have had their involvement and continued involvement. I want to say again thank you to Dane Lynn, too. Stand up and wave to the people. Another roll up your shirt sleeves kind of guy. I love that. Okay, so I think, and Scott, where did Scott go? Scott Cheney. Oh, there you go. Any other announcements before we sign off? Because more than anything, I want to thank the folks in the room, the 200 plus people on the webcast. What else am I missing?
You're not missing anything else other than, for those of you who are in the room, if you want to see a demonstration of the registry and the credential finder in the back after we're done here, you're welcome to go back, and Emily can show you just some of the information you can look at in the credential registry.
Very good. Okay. And with that, then, this is the end of our formal program, but stick around a little and ask questions if you like. Take a gander at the product, and thank you again, everybody.
Ain't gonna start, ain't gonna lose it, know who you are. You don't have to prove it, but